to introduce our guest speaker for the day. And I am requesting Rotarian Raman Nanda to introduce our guest speaker. Over to you, Raman.
Thank you, President. Good evening, Rotarians and spouses and guests. And welcome from my side as the membership director for the new year of Rotary. A happy new year, a happy new Rotary year to all of you from my side. I look forward to a lot of contribution from all of you this year in recommending high quality new members, which, as you know, we are always on the lookout for. So EB Cheney, Vidya Saraf and I are your go-to people. If you have any lady member, normally Vidya Saraf, for others, EB or myself, and all of us are interchangeable in that sense. So if you have a good member to refer to, please don't hesitate. And if you haven't got one till now, my request and recommendation is to start looking, because we have a big target this year, which President and the board have taken on, and we need the help of each and every one of you on this call and those who are not on this call as well. With that, I turn to the pleasant task of introducing my very good friend and colleague from the Indus Entrepreneurs, or TAI, where we are both charter members, Vandana Saxena Poria. She's our first speaker for this year, and we have taken care to find someone who does justice to being the first speaker in a club like ours. So, of course, you have seen in the bulletin her background, you have seen the flyers, which our very active committee has been circulating from the program side. But let me take a few minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, to introduce Vandana, because she does need an introduction with the kind of fantastic background that she has. So Vandana, of course, is an entrepreneur. She's a TEDx speaker. She's a chartered accountant, many things. But more importantly, she's really a master storyteller. She's a disruptive visionary and a curator who awakens and ignites organizations and people. As we all know, change is constant. And unless there's disruption and we keep doing what we were doing last week, last month, last year, the results will be same. So if any one of us or any organization want improvement, want to move up, we need to disrupt ourselves. And there's no better person for that topic than Vandana. So she calls herself as the human alarm clock. And with that, she helps individuals in recalibrating their internal compasses to create transformed workplaces, to amplify growth and profit with purpose. She's talking today on disrupting the narrative of your life. Vandana's background is very, very special. She spent her first 2 decades in UK, then moved to Eastern Europe. She worked with E&Y and was one of the first globally trained people on IFRS. She had her first startup in 1997, almost 25 years back, which was later sold to a listed company. Then she worked with the international division of a listed company and set up centers for them in 10 countries. She's in India since 2005, and there she had a startup called Get Through Guides, very popular, very well known, and that really helped in creating content in an area which was required. In the last 20 years, she has been also involved in creating strong business networks to help organizations and people. I think one of the crowning moments of her life was getting the Order of the British Empire from Her Majesty the Queen in 2008, one of the youngest Asian females to receive this honor. In 2019, she was considered one of the top 100 influencers between UK and India. So throughout her life, Vandana has been observing, having lived in so many different locations, countries, how countries can be so different, people can be so different, but at the heart of it, we have many more similarities than differences. So she has spent the last decade looking at why we are the way we are and why we as a species insist on following systems that are not conducive to purpose and profits. And she has developed really groundbreaking strategies to combat this. From my side, I can say in short, what my observation of Vandana in the last 2 years is, she's a true professional. She does meticulous planning, a thorough follow-up, and ensures that whatever she does, she creates value for everyone in that process. I've really enjoyed all interactions with her, and I've make it a point to attend any of her talks anywhere. On the personal front, I would say that she's a great fighter, and I got to know very recently, maybe last couple of hours, that she's a brown belt in Taekwondo. So I just caution the audience to be careful that you got a real fighter amongst us today, amongst the many other qualifications that she has. And last but not the least, she says she can play the saxophone, but badly. So this is some vulnerability that she was so nice to share with me. Friends, I present to you Vandana Saxena Poria. Over to you, Vandana.
Thank you so much, Raman, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you. I'll share my screen now, if that works, because I've got a presentation. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see? Okay, great. All right. So, Raman, thank you for that introduction. Just to go through what I'm going to be covering in hopefully the next half an hour. Raman's already done most of the introduction, but I want to tell you a little bit else about myself that will make sense or help you understand why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. And I really want you to leave this session with three things, really. The first is that we have all been brought up with fiction. Our whole lives are fiction, right? And I'm going to show you why. The second is that we don't have to live that fiction if we don't want to. And the third is how we can change it if we want to change it. So those are the three things that I'm going to go through, roughly covering the topics that are on your screen now. So Raman was very kind and gave my introduction. I was actually nicknamed the Human Alarm Clock by the late Alec Padamsee. I've written a book with him just before he passed away. We wrote a book together, which hopefully will be out later this year or early next year. And he used to call me the Human Alarm Clock because he felt that I woke him up, which is such an honor. So my aim is to disrupt your thought process, but really, please do not take offense with anything that I say. I'm just there to help probe and, kind of poke you into thinking slightly differently. The chat box is open, so I would love it if, as thoughts come to you, as questions come to you, do put them in. And there is an interactive exercise that I'm going to ask you a bit later. So when you hear what Raman said about me and you see the kinds of companies that I've worked with, it looks so impressive. And when I look at it sometimes, I think, oh my goodness, is that really me? But all of you have the most stunning backgrounds. I've done research. I see Ashok Ghia here, old friend and great supporter of the British Business Group. When I was the chair, he was the treasurer. And then Raman, of course, who I've worked with. But many of you, I know a lot about your backgrounds. So for many of you, I don't think this is quite a stunning background, but a lot of people look at it and think, wow, she's done a lot. And then you see the photos and you think, oh my God, there she is with Priyanka Chopra. There she is with Richard Branson. And it's not like a normal photo. It's like a really quite intimate photo with Richard Branson. And then at the bottom, you see me outside Buckingham Palace. On the left, you see me with the ex-UK Prime Minister, David Cameron, et cetera, et cetera. So it looks really, really impressive. But I want to tell you the truth behind what you see here. I think the media and all of us are very good at portraying a fantastic picture of ourselves, but we don't often talk about the hardships. So I want to tell you about some of the truth about me. here's a few facts. When I say bullied when I was a kid, I mean that in all kinds of ways. I remember being in a car and having, and this was back in the 70s, where I had skinheads banging on the car saying, "Go back to your own country." And you might think, well, why didn't I just get out of it? Well, I was 6 years old at the time. And I had no idea that the color of my skin was going to upset people so much so that they wanted to break the glass and do damage to me. So I was brought up in a very prejudiced 1970s England. I had anxiety as a kid. I still have high functioning anxiety. It's something that I just have to live with. Had asthma. I also had an extremely authoritarian father. So basically, whatever he said went in our house. He made all the decisions. And my mother, although she's incredibly progressive, she is a writer. She's had books published. She's had an award from the President of India for her work. She's extremely submissive when it comes to my father. I haven't had one, but two Me Too experiences. And the reason for the line is all of those happened before I hit the age of 18, right? So that's me. That's what I went through before 18. And then a lot of people say, oh, but you know, you had the charmed life. You sold your first company for a lot of money when you were 27. And then, you know, you moved through Eastern Europe. Well, the truth of it, again, is it was a very, very difficult time. Yes, I had huge success. But at the same time, this is in an era where there was no Google, there was no Facebook, there were no links to, you know, either England or India, the two countries that I felt very close to. And I spent 200 days a year traveling. So there was a huge amount of isolation and a lot of solitude and loneliness. On top of that, I was dealing with a family member who had depression. I've dealt with legal cases, really bad, really difficult legal cases. And I can honestly say that I've faced gender and other biases every single day since I started working. So, and to crown it all, I'm divorced and I'm a single mum. So I have a 15-year-old daughter and a 17-year-old son. So the reason why I want to put that out there is because we're so good as human beings of showing these pictures and, you know, talking about this, but I think it's very important to understand the other side of us too. And during my difficult times, I started to try and think about, why are we the way we are? One of the things that really impacted me was one of the Me Too experiences I couldn't talk about. I didn't talk about it until I got into my 40s, right? Because it happened when I was so young, everything at that time told me it was my fault, right? It was always the girl's fault. And so therefore, I didn't have the strength to speak up about it. And so I started to think about, where do all these rules come from? Who made up these rules? Who decided that it is the girl's fault? I mean, it's not the case anymore, but, you know, it has been for a long time. And I started to get into the history of why we are the way we are. So if we try and understand why we are the way we are, there's a very interesting book called Sapiens, which some of you may have read. And to tell you in a nutshell, I think Yuval Noah Harari, who's a professor at Jerusalem University, really nailed it here. There were 5 humanoid species over 100,000 years ago, right? Homo sapien, our species, was only one of them. There was Neanderthals, there was Homo erectus, Homo mobilus, and they've even discovered possibly a 6th species recently. But the question is, we were one of the smallest ones, the scrawniest ones. Why is it that we were the ones that survived? And we didn't just survive, we got to the top of the food chain. We pretty much decide everything that happens on this planet. So how is it that we managed to do this with giraffes and tigers and, you know, really a lot of animals that could do a lot of damage to us? And he put it down to the fact that it was our ability to get others to believe in our fictional storytelling. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, let's just look at some of the real fictions that exist in the world that all of us have adopted and accept as being real. The first one is money. Now, we know that when we die, we can't take it with us, right? It doesn't really exist, but we've made it so powerful in our lives that everything revolves around money. And yet, actually, it doesn't exist. Another one, we love to think of ourselves as being of a particular race, of a particular religion, etc., etc. But if you go out into space, you can't see any of those borders. We have been taught that we belong to a particular place and we have a passport that says it, so therefore we are. But 5,000 years ago, was it that same place? And the answer is probably not. And the last one that comes up, I mean, we all love jewelry. Well, I don't actually wear any jewelry at all, but most of us do like jewelry. And just think of the prices that we put on gems today, right? Most of you may know the story of De Beers and how they actually created the diamond industry. Sorry, I think there's, okay. So the diamond industry was literally created by fantastic De Beers marketing. Diamonds are actually dime a dozen in certain countries, but it's so controlled that they have made it so special that whenever anyone gets married, you have to have a diamond. Whenever anyone reaches a certain milestone in their life, you have to have a diamond, because a diamond is forever. Coined by De Beers. Who makes the money? De Beers. So these are all examples of fictions that we've brought into our world. And I hope you can see, I'm not trying to say it's right or wrong, but these are ways that we've found belonging. These are ways that we've created the society that we live in today. So I want you to look at these three gorgeous little babies that were photographed by Tracy Schuper. And in the first 5 minutes of life on this planet, we decide their religion, their nationality, and their future path. We don't decide if they're going to be kind, generous, or loving, right? That's not what we say. We say, mera beta ye banega, or whatever. Sorry for my very bad Hindi. But that's the kind of thing that we do. So the question is, why do we do it? Where does this all come from? Well, I started to look around, and I wanted to look at how certain societies had become the way they are. And one thing that struck me very strongly was my ex-husband's family come from the villages in Gujarat, but yet within one generation, he was born and brought up in the UK. So his parents moved to the UK around the same time my parents did, which was in the 60s. And they came from the villages, from an illiterate farming community in Gujarat. But within one generation, their sons and daughters were going to Stanford, Harvard, Cambridge and Durham, etc., right? But their family in the villages was still in the villages. And the best one in the village, and this is no discredit to him, but the best one in the village went on to become a doctor and moved to Rajkot, right? But the ones in the UK became multimillionaires and became professors, etc. And I wanted to try and understand, what was it that made that big difference? And as I went through, what I realized was it depended on how we were brought up and what were the social norms that were brought up around us. So the honest truth is, this is what our lives look like. We've got ourselves, then we've got our family, we've got media and society. And there are all these decisions that have been made from before we were born about our communities, about what's important, what's not important, where we're going to get to, what is construed as success, etc. And that's kind of where we place ourselves. Now, what I've noticed over the past 25 years, I would say, and especially during that time when I was at like the pinnacle of my career, where I was running the international division of a listed company that was growing and became a multi-million dollar enterprise, most of the people that I saw on a daily basis at a senior level were not happy. And yes, they had the money, but they were still vying for more money, or they were vying for promotions, or they were vying for something. But whenever they got it, they were still not happy. They were running again after something else, after something else, after something else. And it made me wonder, why do we do that? Where does that idea come from? And what I realized actually was that the only way that we could stop running was if we either shook ourselves out of that environment or took ourselves out of that environment. So the people in the UK, the people who had moved to the UK, they were suddenly surrounded by completely different norms that said, you've got an equal chance of being anything you want to be. Whereas their family in India weren't given that opportunity. So the ones in the UK who were taken out of their environment were able to change some of the social norms, but then they got on this hamster wheel, which was all about, we have to be successful, we have to earn more money, we have to get a bigger house, we have to get a bigger car. The ones in the village stayed the same because that's what village life was like. And the one who got out, which was one of our older cousins, he got out because he had a mentor at school who said to him, Beta, you can do something more with your life. And just that was enough to get him to be persistent and try, and he got out. So either we have to kind of shake ourselves in our environment heavily, or we have to take ourselves out of our environment if we really want to start changing the norms that we've been brought up with. Here's the other problem that we have. I'm sure all of you have had points in your life where you kind of said something that you shouldn't have said, did something that you shouldn't have done, lost your temper when you shouldn't have lost your temper. And you're probably, you know, it may have repeated. You may have done it twice, you might have done it 3 times, and you might think, why do I keep doing that? I shouldn't do it. And you kind of beat yourself up about it. Well, here is a horrible but very true experiment that scientists did with rats back in the 70s. What they did was they took a group of female rats in a cage and they put them in a dark room and they shone a light on them every so often, every half an hour. And when they shone that light, they electrocuted the rats, right? They put a current through the rat. So not enough to kill them, but enough to make them very upset. So every time a light would come on, the rats would realize that they were going to be electrocuted and they would just shiver, right? Okay, so every time a light came on, the rats would shiver and they would get electrocuted. Now what happened was they got all of those rats pregnant, but as soon as the babies were born, they took the babies into another room where they would shine lights but would not electrocute them. But the babies still went like this because they had inherited it from the mother. It didn't last for 1 generation. It lasted for 3 generations, right? So the point is, there are things that are going on inside us that actually come from generations ago. Now, some people may say, well, you know, they were in the mother's tummy for that time, so it must have impacted them in that way. Well, they did a similar experiment with male rats, and wait for it, the impact lasted for 7 generations, not 3. So what this is telling us, and this is a field called epigenetics, what it's telling us is that we have traumas inside us, or we have difficulties that we go through inside us that we may not be able to do anything about because we don't know exactly where it came from. Okay, so that's one thing to remember before we start beating ourselves up and say, why am I accepting all these social norms that are around us? If you have been accepting them for generations and generations, like, for example, an honest fact, women generally across the world have not been allowed to work. So if they haven't been allowed to work and they've been told to stay at home for so many generations, and suddenly this generation, you say, oh, you can do anything you want, it's not going to be easy for them. Just like a very good friend is a guy called Sarjan. You can meet Sarjan. He's the chaiwala who sits on the corner of lane 6 in Goregaon Park. If you need anything in Goregaon Park, you go to Sarjan. If you need a contact at the RTO office, if you need to find office space, if you need a buy to work at home, you go to Sarjan. Now, if Sarjan lived in the UK, Sarjan would be a multi-millionaire, right? Because he would know how to put connections together. But here in India, he doesn't know how to do it because he's been told, A, he's a Muslim, and B, his job is being a chaiwala. I have tried for 15 years to help him, you know, and many others in Gorenga Park have said the same thing. But he's like, no, this is my job. He is making a difference for his daughters, though, which is fantastic. So what I'm saying is sometimes when we see people who we kind of think, well, we could help you, but why are you not helping yourself? Don't think that they're not trying. It might be because it's coming from successive or past generations. Okay. So let's talk a bit more about these rules, the things that we've blindly accepted. And this is where I'd really love you in the chat box to help me along. So I want you to think about some of the unwritten rules that you grew up with, unwritten or written rules that you had to follow as a child or at school or when you got married, right? So for example, as I said to you, in our house, whatever my father said went, right? You did not disagree with an elder, especially the father in the family, right? So just like that, what kind of rules are now coming to you? So please do put your comments in the chat box so we can talk about a few of them as we go on. So are we going to get anything in the chat box, hopefully? Yeah, always respect elders. Don't argue. Fantastic, Rajiv. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Honesty is the best policy. Yep. And hopefully we saw that. We saw with our parents that if they did something wrong, there was a problem. Okay, Juhi, that's a fantastic one. Girls get married and go to the boys' house. Rajiv, yeah, no sex before marriage. You'll get absolutely hard work pays off, right? So these are all unwritten rules that we kind of grew up with. Raman's one, yeah, mum's job is to work 14 to 16 hours a day. All mums do it, absolutely. And Pankaj, yes, be polite. So these are all rules that we grew up with. Now, have you ever thought about, here are some of the ones that have come up many times as I've interviewed people over the last 25 years, and you'll probably resonate with some of these, maybe not all of them, but these are the most popular ones that I've seen that have come up. So we have rules like this, which we grew up with. The question is, how have they impacted us? And do we even realize the subconscious impact that they have on us? So let's have a look at some of these. If we think about the original purpose and we think about how it's impacting our lives today, let's have a look at what can happen because of it. And I have empirical research on this area that people who generally were taught everyone must listen to elders generally are afraid to speak out, especially to elders. Now, this has a huge impact in the workplace because it means that technically, when you start working, you're always afraid to say anything against your boss, right? So that's one thing that happens. Now, what other people think is very important. As a result, I must show others what I can do. I must be liked by other people. And if I want to be liked by other people, what tends to happen, I don't speak my mind. I become what's known as a people pleaser. One of the things that a lot of people talked to me about was how senior people who are really important end up being quite rude to other people. What ends up happening is we see people becoming arrogant and self-important. If we're told study hard and get a good job, we kind of feel like this is the only way to get ahead. So it's only very recently that entrepreneurship has become a big thing. Before that, it really wasn't, because it was, what will people say? And everyone will say that I worked so hard to get my degree. Why should I become an entrepreneur? I should stay in the corporate field. And don't answer back, what will people think if I do? So these are all, and Rakesh has put a bit of an interesting point. Are these unwritten rules or define our traditions and culture? I guess I'm putting it all together for the moment, just to get, and Rajiv, you're saying these rules were the collective wisdom of elders. It was, but who did these rules serve is what you need to ask. Because my submission to you is that these rules served the people who were in power and not necessarily each of us. And that's where I come back to this same point, that we've seen a lot of upset in the world because of some of these rules. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. Let's have a look at this. Let me go to this example. I was actually called in to do some work in Sydney because there were challenges at the hospital. And it was in ICU, which is the intensive care unit. And those of you who are in the medical field may agree or disagree. But what we found in the intensive care units is there was a lot of bullying that was going on, right? There were toxic doctors and toxic nurses, right? There were basically bullies. What we found though, and think about this logically, who is going to get attracted to work in ICU? Think about ICU, intensive care. It's the one department that is always under pressure. In emergency, you may have times where there are lots of people, and then you also have times where there's very few people. ICU is actually even worse because all the time you are on edge. You've got patients who are potentially dying, right? So who's going to be attracted there? Well, what we found was two types of people were attracted there, either narcissists or saviors, right? Narcissists, people who think I am God, I can save. Or saviors who are, oh my goodness, that person's in pain, I need to help them. So as a result, what ended up happening, and it doesn't just happen in Australia, I know, in fact, somebody told me it happens very much in hospitals in Pune as well. And I know from London, it happens in London as well. You have some very, very strong personalities who are doctors and nurses. And then you have some very, very tame personalities who are also doctors and nurses. What happens? The narcissists take advantage of the saviors and expect the saviors to work and work and work. And the saviors get burnt out and the narcissists don't care, right? That's honestly what was happening in the hospitals in Australia. So we had to bring in a program to actually get the narcissists to realize what was happening, why they were the way they were. And they started to change the policies of who was being brought into ICU by putting them through tests to see what kind of personality they were. So that's a very real example. And I'm sure those of you who have worked in the corporate sector will also identify with that, because there are certain people in certain industries. I've worked a lot in the banking industry where I've seen exactly the same thing. So what I'm trying to say to you is, where does it come from? Where does a narcissistic behavior come from? It comes from childhood and normally seeing someone else in the family who has got those traits. Now, hopefully none of you have seen that close up, but it's worth just examining who were the strongest influences in your family. What traits did they have? Which of those traits have passed into you? And what are the habits that you've got, or the way that you operate, that sometimes you wish you would be able to change? And we'll be able to deal with that in a minute. We'll go to that. But just to give you one other example, we often find with salespeople, they're brilliant, right? We get certain really, really brilliant salespeople. But when we promote those salespeople to being sales managers, it's an absolute nightmare, because as executives, they are great at selling. But when they get promoted, they've suddenly got a team under them. Remember, when you're selling, you're always pleasing your customer. When you become a sales manager, actually your customers are now the people below you. It's all the other sales staff, and you're not going to be able to keep them happy. So as a result, what we found is a number of successful salespeople tended in their childhood to be people pleasers. And they're always wanting to please. And when they get into senior management, they just don't know how to do it because they can't please everyone. And then some of them cripple and find it very difficult, burn out. Others of them find a way to succeed, but often aren't happy inside. So these are all characteristics that we often see in people as a result. So then the question is, can we alter the narrative? Now, we can't change other people. The only people that we can change are ourselves. So let's start with ourselves. And as Raman very rightly said, If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So what we're going to have to do is find a way to rewrite the narrative. So the only way to do that is to go outside of your comfort zone and start becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. It means that you have to catch yourself when you're doing something that you know you don't want to be doing. And you need to really question, where has that come from? And you need to make a mental note in your head that you do need to change it. And that's difficult to do because, and this kind of answers Ruma's question, but Ruma, I'll go into your question more in the Q&A, if that's okay. I've just got a few minutes more on this. Just to remind you, as a human being, whether we agree we came from animals or not, we have a lot of things that are similar to animals. We have something called the amygdala in our head. And that is the part that whenever we're under fear, it starts to activate. It's the stuff that makes us anxious. It's the stuff that stops our growth and learning center from working. And it is just about preservation. It's the freeze, flight, or fright kind of movement. That's part of what we've got in us. And then we've also got, and this is very unusual because we're the only species that we know of to have the prefrontal cortex, which is at the front, which allows us to actually question what we're doing, calm ourselves down, and switches the growth and learning back on for us. Now, the issue that we've got is when we're dealing with traits that are inside us, if some of this has made you feel uncomfortable and made you think, you know, I'd like to tackle this in myself, the thing that you have to remember is that you can't build a Shah Rukh Khan or a Priyanka Chopra body in one day. It is going to take time. And thought processes really are like going to the gym. You have to keep catching yourself and you need to keep adjusting, because if you don't, you'll just go back to the way you were. So what's happening when you get very upset, when you're people pleasing, when you're staying quiet because elders are there, it is actually your amygdala going off. It is your fear center that is in control. And that's why people say that mindfulness and meditation is so good, because it helps us catch these thoughts and helps us realize that these thoughts are not us. And once we catch that these thoughts are not us, we can start doing something about it. But like I said, it does take quite a bit of time to get used to this and to do it effectively. So what can you do now? What can you do about this now that I've talked to you about the social norms that exist, about how they've come into our lives, about why we are the way we are? Well, the first thing to do is, I think, go upside down, to rewrite. And that is to focus on and think about, honestly, without fear, just sit down in a room with a piece of paper. What unwritten rules from your childhood are you still following? That's the first thing to do. The second thing to do is to think about the impact. Now, if you don't think it's having a bad impact on you, then that's great. There are certain things that I learned, things like timing, right? You know, being punctual. Growing up in England, it was a really big thing. And I'm really proud to still have that as a trait that's within me. So it's not that all of these are bad, but we've got to assess, are these unwritten rules working for us or not working for us? So is it having an impact on you in that you're not doing something you'd like to do, or you're doing something that you don't want to do? If you find the answer is, yes, I want to change it, the question that you then have to ask yourself is, how can you change it? And the answer is, most of the time, you can't do it by yourself. You will need someone else who can help you. And that could be a partner. It could be your child. My children are my biggest teachers. I don't know why they ever said that parents are the ones that are supposed to be the wisest. I honestly would say to you humbly that I have learned more from my 15-year-old and 17-year-old than I ever learned in my years before becoming a mother. So it doesn't have to be your partner. It can be your children. It can be a friend. But confide in someone and ask them to help you change it, because they will help you be accountable. And when you're accountable, you will actually start making the changes. And that's when you can really focus on being your authentic self, right? Finding out who's really there inside, taking off all these layers society has put on you. So another way to think about it, if you can't think of these unwritten rules because your brain is frozen, or you kind of think, I can't see any, think about the things that make you feel the 5 A's: anxious, afraid, angry, ashamed, or apathetic. Now, just pick one of those and think about, why do I get anxious when? And then think about that situation. Where did it come from? Where did that rule appear? Do you want to keep it, or do you want to rewrite it? Make your choice and then make the steps to catch yourself in that moment and start altering your behavior. So I'm going to leave you with this question, which is, thinking about what we've said today, and I'd love to see your comments in the chat box, which one rule about yourself would you like to alter? And how can you start rewriting your future today? Because if we don't make those changes within ourselves, people around us won't see that change. When they see a change in us, it inspires them and motivates us to make a change. And as Gandhi said, let's be the change we want to see in the world. And let's take out the divisiveness that we've created because of our human processes. I hope that's been interesting. I hope it's given you some food for thought. I will hand back. I'm very, very happy to take any questions.
People can unmute themselves to ask, and maybe you can start.
Thank you.
With the first question meanwhile.
So shall I start by answering Ruma's questions? What about our inherent temperament? Is what we are only because of external influences? Not at all. As I said, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of traits that come in us from our past, but a lot, and I would venture to say 60% of who we are today is what society has made us rather than who we are. And the reason I say that is because in all the research that I've done and the empirical studies that I've seen and the experiments that I've conducted, people who resonate with themselves the most are people who kind of have gone within, have worked out what these social norms are and said, these are the ones I'm going to follow and these are the ones that I'm not going to follow.
Good. Yes, Ruma, you have a question?
No, I think Sunil has shot a question already.
Yes.
Okay, what are three... Sorry, go on.
I said I was just thanking you, that's all, for answering my question.
Okay. Okay, Sunil's question, what are the 3 things we should do to change ourselves? I think, honestly, the first thing is meditate, right? I think there's nothing that beats meditation. So that's the number 1 thing I do. And there are lots of apps. I don't mean meditation from a religious point of view. I just mean even silent sitting. And you can start with 1 minute on your phone where you just close your eyes and you just sit and you just concentrate on your breathing and you watch what thoughts come into your head, right? And if you do that over a period of time, within a week or within 10 days, you'll start seeing these thoughts coming in and you can start labeling those thoughts as, oh, that's my curious mind, that's my upset mind. You'll start seeing patterns emerging. So that's the number 1 thing that I think you should do. The second thing is that I think you should ask people for honest feedback about yourself. And I know that can be hard to hear sometimes. So maybe start with your best friend who you know loves you anyway, but just say, if there was one thing I could alter about myself, what would you say it is? So I think that's a second thing that you can do. A third thing that I really think you can do is, I think there are some brilliant online resources that are available for any of the areas that you're concerned about or that you would like to do something about. I think go and research. We spend so much time on the outside world and getting things right for the outside world. How much time do we spend on the inside world? And the inside world is the only world that we're really ever going to live in. So, Sunil, I hope that's given you an idea. Okay. Raman, shall I just keep going through the questions?
Yes,
okay, so Ramesh,
please.
you've made a very good point. The starting point is realizing that change is required. You're absolutely right. And I think, honestly, we do know where we need to alter, but we just try and brush it under the carpet. The problem is the more we brush it and the older we get, the bigger the bump comes under the carpet. And one day it all comes out. So I think it's a really good idea to just keep looking under the carpet rather than waiting for something big to happen. Rajiv is saying, how do you start saying no to things that you don't value or enjoy? There are many theories on this, Rajiv. What I would say is the best thing to do is to do more of what you do enjoy rather than, then you've got an excuse to say no, right? But the strongest thing is just learning to say no. So I played this game with my kids because I could see that one of my kids was becoming a pleaser. I said, I want you to ask me lots of questions and I'm just going to say no to you, right? And then I'm going to ask you lots of questions and you have to say no. And it was my daughter. And I like I said to her, can you give me a hug? And she had to say no. And that was very, very difficult for her. But I encouraged her just for this, as an exercise, as a game to do this, to just get her used to saying no. And, the thing that you have to think about is if you're saying yes to something that you don't really want to do, that's your time that's going to go. And you're going to be annoyed by it. So it's going to take up mental bandwidth that you don't want to do. So you have to make a switch and you have to know it is going to feel uncomfortable. But you don't get anywhere if you don't start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's one thing we've never been taught. We're never taught this at school. So Rajiv, I hope that answers. Anirudh, you make a very good point. There's a lot of rules that we follow that help society overall if they don't help the individual. And if society has been successful, then the rules must have helped even if we don't like them. To an extent, I agree. But if you look at capitalism, if you look at what's going on with Canada and the fact that they're having a heat wave over there, and we all know it's to do with climate change, if you look at the poverty that we have, not just in India, but in Africa, if you look at the discrimination against women, to the extent that we have 200, I think at last count, 200 million baby girls were aborted. 200 million females could have existed in India that were aborted. I think we have a lot of rules that we need to change too. So whilst I agree with you, to an extent, I would also say that if we are going to better society, and if we're going to evolve in the way humans should be evolving, if we're going to evolve our consciousness, then we need to start standing up for these things, and we need to stop accepting these as rules. Rakesh, could you suggest an analytical method for which unwritten rules to continue to follow and which ones to attempt to change? I'll tell you really something that I know works, and that is what resonates with you internally. If you go deep down, what resonates? Do you want to be a people pleaser? Ask yourself. And based on that, you will know. So I would say an analytical rule is the wrong way to look at it, because I think for one person and another person, it could be very, very different. But I'd be very happy, Rakesh, to have an offline conversation with you about it.
Two last questions.
Okay.
You can answer two more questions and then we go back to the present.
Okay. So Arun says, how do you get out of the stigmas of the past which still bother you and move ahead? There's a practice called forgiveness. It's the only thing you can do. So things that happened, like I'm telling you, for years, my Me Too experience, I thought I was to blame until I got into my 40s. And then when I went to seek professional help for it, which I'm not embarrassed to say, then when my therapist said to me, Vandana, do you realize you were groomed by a pedophile? When she put it in those words, and she said he perpetrated crimes on you, I had to forgive myself. I was a kid, right? So these are the things that we have to do to get out of the stigmas of the past. We have to forgive ourselves. We have to accept what's happened. We have to forgive the other person, and we have to move on. And it's not as easy as that. Like I said, it takes time and it takes practice.
Ashok Gia wants to say hi to you. Please say hi to him.
Hi, Ashok. So nice to see you, and I will catch up with you offline.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Vandana, for this excellent session. May I request President-elect Uday Dharmadhikari to give the vote of thanks.
Where's Uday?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Vandana. And, you know, it's very rarely you find a person who speaks the truth about herself or himself, you know. I think that's the first quality or the only quality of a successful person. And I must say that that's very, very proud to have you here. The second thing I must say, you said two words. One is change. I always believe the change is constant. And the second you said is unlearn. You know, personally, I always believe in these two words. And I can tell you one thing, those who follow, those who say, I have seen who moved my cheese, right? And that is how it's there. The change is constant. So it's a beautiful word, unlearn. And I only hope and trust that with today's talk, we as a individually and collectively will look at our historical background and we'll see that what we can unlearn and what the changes we can adopt to make our life better for ourselves as well as for the entire society. Thank you very much, Vandana, for accepting our invitation and giving and enlightening us for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vandana, for this excellent thing. Perhaps the breadth of your talk was phenomenal. You covered so many aspects. This is through a virtual mode. This is a certificate of appreciation on behalf of our Rotary Club of Pune Central. And beyond this, we were indeed happy to have you here and listening to you. And I'm sure all of us will take back something to ponder upon, something to work upon. And that makes the talk extremely useful and purposeful. Thanks a lot for the session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. Thank you. Really.
Thank you.
Yep.
The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Vandana.
very much.